Hey guys, tonight we're staying up way past bedtime, and if I'm honest, I have a dreadful feeling creeping into my skull that you probably won't make it to the end of this one. Not because it's long, but because the truth we're chasing feels less like knowledge and more like a contaminant, a neurotoxin delivered through pure information. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments and what time the clock is showing. For me, the clock stopped about 20 minutes ago, right when the frequency started. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's descent together. The initial report landed on my desk at the Goddard Space Flight Center, flag code Omega 9, meaning observationally impossible, scientifically catastrophic, and immediately detrimental to planetary security. We were monitoring the telemetry from the James Webb Space Telescope, JWST, standard, painstakingly slow, deep field analysis, attempting to see beyond the visible cosmic horizon, searching for the first scatterings of light from proto-galaxies, trying to map the scaffolding of the early universe. What JWST sent back wasn't an image of expansion or cooling dust. It was a picture of the darkness between the clusters, the supposed absolute vacuum. And in that vacuum, a pattern was resolving itself with sickening clarity. It wasn't a stellar eruption or the graceful distortion of gravitational lensing. It was a vast, repeating geometric structure, perfectly tiled and rigidly non-Euclidean, stretching across an estimated 7 million light-years of empty space. Imagine an infinitely complex hexagonal grid, but composed entirely of negative pressure and total light absorption. A lattice made of absolute, structured absence. This colossal architecture was not static. It was subtly, rhythmically pulsing, a barely detectable fluctuation in the extreme infrared spectrum, 13.7 microns, that didn't follow any known stellar decay rate or cosmological redshift. It looked like an impossibly huge iris, a monolithic eye, opening, slowly, across the very fabric of reality, and it seemed to be gazing directly back along the line of JWST's sight. The second the image fully rendered on my monitor, the temperature in the sealed server farm dropped instantly, falling 10 degrees Celsius in under 30 seconds. Simultaneously, a sharp, low-frequency hum, a visceral vibration, not a sound, drilled into my inner ear, resonating specifically with the bones of my orbital sockets and the base of my skull. It wasn't deafening, but it was inescapable, a pressure that felt like being submerged under miles of cold, still water. I felt my personal emotional disruption flare instantly. It wasn't panic. It was a cold, crystalline certainty that we had accidentally zoomed in on the surveillance camera pointed at us. I was consumed by a dreadful, deep-seated conviction that this structure had been waiting for the exact frequency of light generated by a terrestrial instrument, the precise wavelength captured by the JWST's golden mirrors, to respond. That hum, that sudden chill, that image of the cosmic eye, it was too perfect. I instantly knew. I don't think the universe ever meant for us to know about this specific geometry, whatever it was. It felt less like a discovery and more like a catastrophic intrusion, like walking in on a silent, ancient conversation between forces so immense they considered gravity an afterthought. This image, this stunning, unforgettable image of the void lattice, or V-lattice as we rapidly christened it, was the strike that lit the fuse of inevitability. The significance of the V-lattice was amplified immediately by a second, far closer anomaly detected just 0.7 seconds later. Our deep drilling operation on the far side of the moon, the Lunar Borehole Project, LBHP, suddenly reported detecting the exact same low-frequency pulse. This was scientifically impossible, a profound violation of scale. How could a pattern spanning millions of light-years across the intergalactic void resonate perfectly, phase-locked, with something buried a mere 2,000 feet beneath the surface of Earth's synchronous satellite? The factual scientific anchor we struggled to rationalize was the precise measurement of the lunar pulse. Dr. Alara Vance, the drilling chief and a relentlessly pragmatic geophysicist, confirmed the frequency, 0.618 Hz. This number is unsettlingly familiar. The golden ratio, the Fibonacci constant, nature's preferred signature for growth and beauty, yet delivered here on a cosmological scale that transcended terrestrial life. It suggested mathematical perfection, rigorously enforced, emanating from the lifeless satellite. The LBHP wasn't just drilling for regolith and mantle samples. They were attempting to penetrate the deep lunar crust, seeking residual magnetic fields or primordial material untouched by impacts. When I relayed the JWST data and the phase law confirmation, Alara didn't dismiss the possibility of coincidence, which was usually her first response. She sounded exhausted but focused over the comms, the static almost matching the low hum in my head. "The resonance is non-seismic, Commander," she reported, her voice dry and clipped. "It's a pressure oscillation, perfectly uniform, but it doesn't propagate like stress waves in rock. There's no attenuation, no decay. It's like the entire moon's mass is shifting its density slightly, rhythmically, in perfect response to a distant conductor. We're detecting the tidal pull of something that shouldn't obey the inverse square law." I started delving into older, more fringe, more speculative ideas about the moon. The ancient mythic concept of the moon as a celestial ship, a highly advanced reflective mirror, or an artificial, hollow construct placed there by an unknown intelligence. This hypothesis had always been a playground for dreamers, yet now, staring at the V-lattice reflecting back from deep space, the idea that the moon was a functional component, a massive, silent machine, felt terrifyingly relevant. If the moon was a mirror, what was it reflecting? And why was that reflection now pulsing in sync with an impossibly distant, alien geometry? Alara's team had just hit a stratum of material that defied spectroscopic analysis and resisted coring. It wasn't metallic, ceramic, or basalt. It was structured, rigid, yet when they tried to core it, the materials simply absorbed or deflected the stress field around the drill bit, maintaining its perfect geometric integrity. They weren't drilling rock. They were grinding against the transposed geometry of the lattice itself, now solid. The initial curiosity that had driven my entire career instantly curdled into pure, focused dread. We had gone looking for the dust of creation, and instead, we found the hidden infrastructure of maintenance, humming silently right next door, protecting us from a reflection we never should have seen. The sensory impact within the LBHB crew intensified with every meter the drill advanced against the unseen barrier. The deeper they went, the more pronounced the physical and psychological effects became. Dr. Vance had deployed specialized cryosensitive acoustic sensors, originally designed to detect subsurface water ice near the poles, but they were now entirely overwhelmed by the persistent, undampable 0.618 Hz oscillation. The facility on the surface, already rigorously shielded from cosmic radiation, began exhibiting internal anomalies far more disturbing than flickering lights. The lighting panels and air purifiers didn't just malfunction. They pulsed. They cycled their power consumption in perfect rhythmic patterns dictated by the internal frequency. This phenomenon provided our next crucial, disturbing factual scientific anchor, the organized self-assembly of lunar regolith. Lunar soil is largely a jumble of pulverized rock, glass, and mineral fragments. It is inert dust. But the pulse seemed to be commanding the dust. Alara reported dust accumulations in the corners of their habitats and storage bays, not random piles, but precise, temporary geometric formations. Small, stable tetrahedrons and perfect cubes would form and then collapse in slow motion, only to reform minutes later, dictated by the internal vibration. The material was being temporarily lent structure and cohesion by the energetic frequency. Its organizing mass, Commander, Alara whispered in a log entry, her voice amplified and uneven, suggesting she was speaking too close to the microphone, perhaps for comfort. Like sound through sand on a drumhead. Chladni figures on a massive scale. But the drumhead is the entire moon, and the pattern is mathematically mandated. This frequency is a command structure. The emotional arc was shifting rapidly from initial fear into a sickening, grinding dread, amplified by the crew's cognitive dissonance. They were elite scientists, trained to deal with the harsh, predictable physics of space. This was anti-physics, a gentle, meticulous reorganization of reality at a foundational, subatomic level. We looked for natural causes, tectonic strain, magma flow, but every data point pointed back to the 0.618 Hz oscillation as the prime mover, the silent conductor of the lunar mass. I tried desperately to contextualize this within established physics, perhaps an extreme manifestation of the cosmic concept involving non-locality or entangled matter, where the V-lattice acted as the central oscillator. But my analysis leaned heavily toward the speculative. I started researching every ancient myth that treated the moon as a dormant entity, a shell waiting to be cracked. The idea that the moon was not built around a natural core, but around an incomprehensibly vast, highly engineered internal mechanism, hidden from telescopic view. If the moon was a shell, then we weren't just drilling into geological strata. We were effectively scratching the skin of something immense and potentially sentient, or at least massively automated. The pulse was less a heartbeat and more the slow, steady rhythm of massive, geological respiration. We were disturbing a fundamental cosmic security protocol. Alara's last success with the drill was reaching a layer she finally labeled ceramic zero, a substance impossibly hard, yet simultaneously flexible and possessing zero thermal conductivity. When the drill pressed against it, the material didn't shatter. It depressed and then instantly sprang back, rejecting the kinetic energy of the impact entirely. It was then they discovered the geometry was not just resonating. It was propagating from the depths, suggesting a structure that went far deeper than the superficial crust. We ran the spectral analysis on ceramic zero. It contained isotopes that defy stability, specifically massive, long-chain carbon and silicon complexes stabilized in perfect tetrahedral and hexagonal bonds. Molecular structures that require immense, directed pressures and energy gradients we couldn't replicate even in advanced fusion reactors. We aren't detecting the elements themselves, Commander. Chun, our lead analyst, reported from Earth, his voice shaking. We are detecting the mathematical blueprint of the elements. It's too perfect, too clean. It looks like nature's syntax, but written in a different alphabet, one where instability is defined as perfect rigidity. I felt the immense, terrifying weight of realization settling in. We weren't observing geology. We were observing hyperdimensional engineering. And the engineer was still on site, running the program. The team deployed small, deep-penetrating submersibles, not for tunneling through water, but through the now malleable regoliths surrounding the borehole, outfitted with high-gain receivers and ultra-low frequency magnetometers. They were searching for the literal source of the 0.618 Hz signal. What they found 2,500 feet down was a massive internal cavity, stretching perhaps 300 meters wide, entirely lined with the ceramic zero material, which appeared translucent and iridescent in the probe's light. Alara described it as looking like shattered glass, but seamlessly healed. Inside, there was nothing but profound, silent vacuum and the relentless, hypnotic frequency. Alara took the risk that sealed their fate. She sent a primary inspection probe directly into the void of the cavern. The live feed showed the probe descending slowly, its running lights reflecting off the crystalline lining. The reflection wasn't crisp, it was delayed, refracted multiple times by the complex geometry, making the lining look like a kaleidoscope spinning in slow motion, creating layered, shifting illusions. Then, the probe reached the center of the cavity. The 0.618 Hz frequency spiked, jumping temporarily to 1 Hz before snapping back. On Earth, we felt the vibration return, a sudden, sharp thrum, accompanied by a wave of cold, intense nausea that gripped the entire control center. Alara's voice, now utterly subdued, came through the amplified comms. "Commander, the frequency isn't coming from the walls. It's coming from the center. It's radiating from a single, suspended point of light. It's not incandescent heat. It's dense light, cold and infinitely heavy." The image from the probe was our first true, terrible glimpse of the internal infrastructure. The light source was perfectly spherical, about the size of a small terrestrial car, but it was not emitting light in the traditional sense. It was folding and unfolding space around itself, and that process of geometric distortion was emitting the frequency. It was a gravitational node, precisely tuned. It was here, staring into the face of a perfect sphere of captured, cold light suspended inside the moon, that the fear solidified into a profound, chilling recognition of our own scale. We were insects disturbing a monument of incomprehensible age and power. We had already crossed the Rubicon of simple scientific inquiry and stepped firmly into the realm of sealed secrets. We had asked a question the cosmos did not want to answer, and I knew, with a certainty that settled like ice in my bloodstream. I don't think the universe ever meant for us to know what materializes perfect silence. The realization that the sphere of dense light was the true epicenter of the 0.618 Hz pulse pushed the emotional arc past simple dread and into a state of horrifying, almost paralyzing, awe. The crew, already isolated and disoriented by the pervasive vibration, was now dealing with the absolute contradiction of physics, matter that behaves like memory, light that is cold, and geometry that generates mass. We immediately needed confirmation that the sphere was, in fact, the near-field counterpart to the distant V-lattice observed by JWST. Chun initiated a complex, rapid triangulation calculation, comparing the nanosecond phase shifts of the lunar pulse with the observational data of the deep space geometry. The results returned in under a minute, absolute and terrifyingly unambiguous. They were phase-locked. The sphere inside the moon was acting as a primary resonator, relaying the 0.618 Hz signal across a gulf of 7 million light-years. "It's not just echoing the signal, Commander," Chen reported, his voice high-pitched and tight, with barely contained hysteria. "It's participating in it. It's an active node. The moon is functionally a massive, automated relay station for something impossibly vast, something that uses the golden ratio as its fundamental unit of communication. The factual scientific anchor of seismic wave propagation suddenly took on a sinister, defining meaning. The normal internal structure of the moon involves distinct, layered boundaries: crust, mantle, core, and seismic waves. P waves and S waves travel through these layers at specific speeds, indicating density changes. When the pulse intensified, all normal seismic signatures vanished. The moon, for the duration of the frequency peak, was behaving as a homogeneous solid, but one whose density shifted geometrically, not gravitationally, entirely controlled by the 0.618 Hz input. Alara, now driven by a mix of scientific curiosity and utter, fatalistic awe, began documenting the subtle, yet pervasive, effects the frequency had on the human perception within the LBHB habitat. Crew members reported visual distortions that were not optical illusions or vertigo, but genuine shifts in the environment's underlying geometry. A perfectly straight hallway would momentarily become curved. Objects would appear slightly off-axis from their physical location, and shadows seemed to lean the wrong way, all conforming precisely to the mathematical constraints of the 0.618 ratio. "It's tuning us," Alara noted in her logs, which were rapidly deteriorating from technical reports into philosophical, metaphysical poetry. "The frequency is aligning our sensory input, forcing our brains to process reality through a hyperdimensional lens. We are momentarily seeing the universe as the V-lattice sees it, pure structure and relationship." This led directly to the adoption of the mythic or speculative cosmic concept that the moon was a massive, active frequency filter. We began to suspect it wasn't a reflective mirror simply meant for surveillance, but a complex, ancient shield designed to dampen or entirely deflect the effects of the V-lattice's true nature on terrestrial life. If the V-lattice was the physical structure of an entity, or the medium through which it operated, then the moon was designed to ensure we never perceive the universe in its full, non-Euclidean, horrifying complexity. It maintained a local, simple, three-dimensional geometry safe for fragile human consciousness. And we had just drilled a pinhole through the primary shield layer. The dread became focused on the inevitability of perception. If the pulse was forcing geometry to shift, what was the actual, true, unfiltered shape of the space they were standing in, and why was their sanity dependent on a subtle, constant lie? The psychological pressure on the base increased exponentially. The constant, low hum morphed into a physical presence. Crew members started experiencing synchronized nightmares, not of monsters, but of equations unfolding in impossible complexity, of seeing the world as a seamless, rigid lattice made of light and profound, structured absence. One technician was found sketching the Mandelbrot set repeatedly, claiming it was the moon's fingerprint. Alara made her final, critical error. She sent the probe closer to the sphere, despite my desperate, frantic urging to retreat and seal the borehole. She wanted to know, with maddening clarity, what the dense light was composed of, believing the answer lay just beyond the sphere's surface tension. The moment the probe physically touched the perfect surface of the sphere, the oscillation ceased. It didn't decay, it simply stopped. Absolute, profound silence fell upon the LBHB and, momentarily, even on my server room on Earth. It was a silence deeper than the void, a fundamental absence of vibration, a sound that had been subtracted from the universe. Then, the silence was replaced by a massive, single thump, echoing through the lunar crust, a sound so deep it felt like the displacement of 1 billion tons of mass. The geometric pattern of the V-lattice, visible 7 million light-years away, flared into brilliant, blinding, violet energy for exactly 0.618 seconds. A flash so bright it saturated JWST's sensitive long-wave sensors. It was an acknowledgement. Alera's last recorded transmission, overlaid with static that sounded strangely like muffled, mechanical laughter, was a single, existential whisper, thick with sudden, terrible comprehension. I don't think the universe ever meant for us to know the weight of perfect mathematics. The connection cut out entirely. The LBHP went dark, electronically silent, leaving us stranded on Earth, staring at the telemetry of a dead relay station and a blinding flash 7 million light-years away, knowing we had just committed the ultimate cosmic trespass, and that something vast had just woken up. For 3 agonizing hours following the Cascade event, the LBHP was completely silent. We couldn't raise them, couldn't detect power consumption, and all subsurface seismic monitoring showed only residual, confusing noise, a faint scraping sound, like sand shifting against an impossibly smooth glass surface. We finally managed to get a low-resolution satellite image of the base. The facility structure itself was intact, but there was a profound and terrifying change immediately surrounding the borehole entrance. The area was no longer covered in loose regolith. It was veneered in a thin, glistening sheet of the ceramic zero material, shaped into precise, interlocking, hexagonal tiles that shimmered under the direct lunar sunlight, reflecting the light in impossible angles. The moon was actively and rapidly healing the wound, sealing the penetration point. My focus shifted entirely from rescue to understanding the physical consequences of the breach. The factual scientific anchor we turned to was the study of localized angular momentum. The dense light sphere, before its dissolution, had been generating localized gravity fields that were entirely counterintuitive. Angular momentum is conserved. Objects in orbit or spinning maintain their orientation. But the LBHP data suggested that the sphere was locally neutralizing angular momentum, allowing matter to move in perfect, straight, inertial lines within its immediate vicinity, irrespective of the moon's rotation or the orbital mechanics. This meant the geometry was creating a localized environment of perfect zero-g and zero-spin. It was fundamentally rewriting local spacetime curvature to conform to its own internal needs. A faint, heavily filtered signal eventually flickered back from the LBHP, manually activated, bypassing the main communication array and routed through a hardened telemetry unit. It was Alera. Her voice was utterly transformed, no longer terrified or panicked, but hypnotic, calm, and imbued with an impossible sense of vastness and crystalline patience. "We didn't destroy it, Commander," she reported, the words slow, measured, and resonating with a terrifying clarity. "We opened the path." The sphere responded not by shattering or breaking, but by yielding. It recognized the breach as a valid point of access. She described how, after the catastrophic silence and the great thump, the sphere of dense light had dissolved instantly, fading like an illusion. It had revealed what lay inside, a vast, crystalline structure that stretched seemingly infinitely into the lunar interior. It wasn't a traditional core. It was an interwoven lattice made of ceramic zero crystals, pulsing with a faint internal luminosity. The crew was now experiencing the cosmic concept of hypergeometry made manifest. Alera struggled to describe the sight, using analogies that broke down even as she articulated them. "It's not empty space, Commander. It's structure. It's a geometry that shifts constantly, fluidly maintaining the 0.618 ratio across millions of miles of material. When you look at it, you don't perceive depth, you see connection. Every crystalline intersection is a nodal point of gravitational resonance. She confirmed that the 0.618 Hz pulse was now radiating not from a central sphere, but from the surface of this massive internal lattice. The crystalline geometry, stretching beneath the lunar crust, was essentially the moon's active defense tissue, and the pulse was its operational rhythm, attempting to recalculate the filter parameters. This was the culmination of the emotional arc, the terrible, magnificent shift from abject fear to a terrifying brand of awe. The moon wasn't just inert rock or an external satellite. It was a vast, complex, active machine, and we had forced it to show its workings. Alara's team, under the thrall of the rhythmic frequency, were no longer trying to escape. They were actively trying to understand and map the crystalline landscape, driven by an urgency that was no longer their own. She described walking toward the breach, their movements feeling strangely effortless in the localized zero-G field generated by the lattice. The structure isn't just crystal, she continued, her voice gaining an unnatural poetic lilt, as if channeling vast, silent information. It's memory. It registers every meteor impact, every cosmic ray, every seismic shift. It's a perfect geological archive of the last 4 billion years. And if we touch it, we gain access to the whole history, the entire protocol. One of her team, a young geologist named Reyes, succumbed to the compulsion. He deliberately reached out and touched the crystalline lattice. His reaction was instant and overwhelming. He didn't scream or thrash. He simply collapsed onto the engineered floor, eyes wide open, leaking tears of profound shock and realization, his body rigid. When the others checked him, he wasn't dead, but his EEG, monitored remotely, registered a perfect sine wave at 0.618 Hz, perfectly synchronized with the moon's frequency. He was receiving data at the speed of the machine's operation. He had become a terminal. Alara finished her report with a profound sense of self-awareness that was utterly chilling. She knew she was compromised, perhaps physically invaded by the frequency, yet she pressed on, driven by the sheer majesty of the sight and the knowledge she now possessed. The question wasn't what they found, but what they were now becoming, immersed in the rhythm of the cosmic machine. The lattice was built of resonance, and now, the resonance was starting to seek new, biological hosts. We had reached a truth too vast to contain, one that necessitated total silence. I don't think the universe ever meant for us to know the language of inorganic thought. The transmission from the LBHB, still sporadic and heavily encrypted, became less about scientific description and more about pure, unfiltered sensory data relayed through Alara's mesmerizing commentary. She was mapping the internal geometry not with sensors, but with her mind, claiming the 0.618 Hz pulse was guiding her cognitive processes, allowing her to visualize hyperspatial coordinates. The lattice isn't solely connected to the deep void outside. She corrected her earlier assumption, her voice a calm echo of cosmic certainty. It's connected to everything within the system. It's the regulator. The true purpose of the 0.618 Hz pulse was becoming terrifyingly clear. It wasn't just a signal. It was a core regulatory function. The moon's internal structure was generating a highly localized gravitational lensing field, but reversed. Instead of merely bending light around massive objects, it was absorbing and scattering specific frequencies of energy away from Earth, specifically, those frequencies generated by immense, non-local gravitational distortions. This tied directly back to the distant V-lattice seen by JWST. The V-lattice, spanning millions of light-years, wasn't an entity itself, but a boundary condition, the actual, unfiltered geometric structure of the deep void. And it was radiating something immense and ancient, a stress field that should have been lethal to complex carbon life on Earth. The moon was a colossal, active defense mechanism, a frequency filter specifically designed to maintain the illusion of a simple, stable, three-dimensional universe for the benefit of terrestrial biological processes. This revelation, that our entire cosmic view, our sanity, and our physical stability were fundamentally manipulated, shifted the emotional state from profound awe back into a heightened, clinical, existential terror. The moon was a shield, and by drilling through, we had just glanced over the parapet and into the actual, unfiltered neighborhood. Alara explained that when the pulse was active at 0.618 Hz, the moon was essentially creating a localized safe zone of simple Newtonian physics and predictable gravity. When they penetrated the shell, they disabled the local filter in a small area, allowing a small portion of the unfiltered reality to bleed through. "Look at the Earth, Commander," she commanded, her voice suddenly sharp with urgency. "The truth is being reflected now. The lattice is showing us what we ignore." I directed our most powerful orbital telescope towards the moon's surface, focusing on the dark side where the LBHB was located, and asked for an immediate, high-res visual of the Earth reflected in the lunar surface near the freshly sealed breach. The high reflectivity of the newly formed ceramic zero surface acted as a warped, perfect mirror. The mythic or speculative cosmic concept of the moon as the lid, the great blocker, or the watcher crystallized perfectly. What I saw wasn't the regular reflection of Earth. The lunar regolith near the crystalline outbreak was acting as a near-perfect mirror surface, warped by the geometric shifts, but showing the reflection clearly. I saw our planet, beautiful and blue, but surrounding it, extending far beyond the atmosphere and filling the orbital space with incomprehensible density, was a vast, dark, semi-translucent presence. It was the shadow entity, a colossal, shifting geometry that resembled a dense, non-linear cloud, swirling slowly, anchored to the Earth, yet existing primarily in a higher dimension. It was invisible to the naked eye, undetectable by most of our conventional instruments because the moon usually filtered the exact frequencies, the high-energy gravitational harmonics, that would reveal it. This dark presence was the true resident of our system, a cosmic apex predator, or perhaps merely an indifferent, massive gravitational distortion, but it was definitely there, masked by the lunar frequency. The V-lattice in the distant void was not just a blueprint. It was a node in the network of this entity's influence, and the moon was a carefully constructed point of counterfrequency. Alara saw it too, reflected in the geometry below her. "It's a reflection of the truth, Commander. The moon is not protecting us from space. It's protecting us from gravity itself, from the pure, unfiltered gravitational stress of that entity. If that shadow were to fully interact with our three dimensions, every atomic bond on Earth would fail instantly." She described how the crystalline structure was vibrating in response to the massive shadow's presence, fighting desperately to restore the filter. But the breach was too great. "Reyes is awake," Alara stated, her voice unervingly calm, like a priest reciting dogma. He touched the lattice and received the entire geometric instruction set. He's drawing it now. It's the counter-frequency, the shutdown code, or the override code. She sent us a crude, yet mathematically perfect sketch Reyes had produced. It wasn't a diagram. It was a complex fractal shape that seemed to vibrate on the screen, causing immediate visual distress. It was mathematically beautiful, fundamentally wrong in every conceivable way, and absolutely terrifying. It was the key to turning the moon's defenses off permanently or integrating with them entirely. The internal geometry of the moon was beginning to shift violently. The crystalline structure was contracting, trying to seal the breach. The frequency was accelerating, rising above the 0.618 Hz baseline, a desperate, rapid hum. The final, terrible implication landed with the force of an extinction event. We had not discovered a machine. We had provoked a sentinel. I don't think the universe ever meant for us to know the coordinates of the great darkness, which is the negative space around light. The pace of the pulse was now screaming, rapidly climbing past 1 Hz and approaching 5 Hz. A rapid, anxious tremor that violently rattled the deep lunar crust. The visual anomalies on Earth were escalating. Small, temporary geometric ripples were observed in high-altitude atmospheric readings and deep-sea bathymetry charts, confirming that the moon's protective filter was failing catastrophically. Alara, now totally immersed and operating with the terrible clarity offered by the induced geometry, was preparing to initiate the ultimate cosmic trespass. Full force synchronization with the moon's core operating frequency, using Reyes received code. She was relying on the highly speculative factual scientific anchor of Schumann resonance, the set of global electromagnetic standing waves generated by lightning discharges in the Earth ionosphere cavity. Terrestrial life, it is theorized, is subtly tuned to the lower Schumann frequencies, around 7.83 Hz. Alara's final hypothesis was that the 0.618 Hz pulse was specifically designed to counteract the Schumann harmonics that would otherwise allow human consciousness to perceive the hyperdimensional shadow entity. The filter didn't just affect physics, it shielded perception. By pushing the pulse far beyond its operational tempo, she believed she could force the crystalline structure to either fully integrate with her team's consciousness, allowing them to ride the frequency back to Earth with the full truth, or, conversely, force a controlled systemic shutdown, eliminating the moon's protective influence and letting the true void flow over them. It was a final, magnificent gamble driven entirely by awe and the complete destruction of the mammalian instinct for self-preservation. The structure is singing, Alara transmitted, her voice now layered with harmonic echoes. It's trying to communicate its failure code to the V-lattice. But the pulse isn't just a rhythm. It's a language, a geometric syntax. And I'm learning the grammar. The mythic or speculative cosmic concept driving this final, desperate move was the waking. If the moon was an ancient mechanism, forcing the resonance cascade might wake the mechanism's operator, or, more terrifyingly, fully awaken the entity it was shielding us from. The shadow would step fully into our reality. Alara and the 2 remaining conscious crew members, Reyes was now inert, a living antenna, manually placed high-frequency transponders deep into the exposed crystalline core. These transponders were designed to absorb and amplify the existing, unstable frequency and reflect it back into the lattice, forcing a catastrophic feedback loop based on the geometry Reyes had provided. The moment the transponders were activated, the geometry within the moon reacted violently. The crystalline structure didn't melt or break, it multiplied itself. New, razor-sharp crystals sprouted instantly from the existing ones, growing inward towards the center, attempting to seal the wound and overwhelm the foreign signal with terrifying speed. But the resulting feedback loop caused a catastrophic resonance cascade that surpassed anything we had modeled. On Earth, we watched the telemetry spike past all safety parameters. The 0.618 Hz pulse went critical, spiking into the gigahertz range for a blinding moment, saturating the inner solar system with an energy output that momentarily eclipsed the sun in certain low-wave spectra. What happened next was not an explosion, but a fundamental, totalizing revelation. My mind, saturated by the frequency relayed through the last operational instruments, briefly achieved perfect, forced synchronization with the moon's system. I saw the truth not as an image, but as a vast, geometric calculation that simultaneously defined all matter and energy. I understood what the shadow entity was. It was the raw, untamed gravitational potential of an older, higher-dimensional universe, manifesting in our system as a necessary counterbalance, stabilized only by the massive, intricate, computational mechanism of the moon. And I understood that the moon was not merely a filter. It was a reflection engine, generating a protective frequency that defined our limited, three-dimensional reality. The cascade caused the moon's defense frequency to momentarily drop to absolute zero. For one terrifying, eternal second, the filter was entirely gone. I saw the shadow entity in its full, staggering glory. It wasn't tentacled or biological. It was a colossal, shifting geometric formula, a lattice of absence that seemed to occupy the negative space around all known matter. It was mathematically sound, utterly breathtaking in its complexity, and infinitely, beautifully malevolent simply by existing in proximity to our fragile reality. It was the true face of the void, devoid of empathy, driven only by the indifferent, overwhelming laws of complex structure. I heard Alara's final, perfect transmission, tinged with agonizing euphoria and triumph. We achieved synchronicity, Commander. The pulse, it is the sound of thinking. And we broke the silence. We know why it is necessary. Then, the moon's filter slammed back into place. The cascading energy reversed, sealing the breach instantly, the ceramic zero material growing over the wound like self-healing skin. The high-res satellite feed showed the LBHP facility now encased entirely in the silvery, impossible material, a smooth, geometrically perfect tomb. The pulse returned, settling back to 0.618 Hz, but now with a subtle, unnerving variation, an almost imperceptible stutter in its rhythm, like a machine that had briefly choked on an unexpected, massive input. The geometry of the V-lattice in deep space faded back to its usual, subtle hum. The quiet resolution was achieved. The machine was operational again. The shield was in place. But the knowledge was loose in my mind, a contaminant I could not purge. The geometry had shown us the shadow, and now the shadow knew it had been briefly seen. I stood in the dead silence of the control room, the memory of that beautiful, terrible geometry imprinted on my optic nerve. I was terrified, yet profoundly, awfully enlightened. I don't think the universe ever meant for us to know the true cost of simplicity. The moon settled back into its eternal routine, the quiet hum of the 0.618 Hz frequency subtly rewoven into the background electromagnetic noise of the Earth. It's too faint for general detection by terrestrial instruments now, but if you listen very closely, late at night, in the quietest rooms, you can feel it. A faint, rhythmic pressure behind the sinuses, a persistent, low thrum in the marrow of your bones. It is a constant reminder that the Great Shield is back in service, albeit scarred and momentarily overloaded. The official story is catastrophic equipment failure and an unfortunate loss of life due to an unexpected, extreme seismic event originating deep within the lunar crust. The ceramic zero tomb of the LBHB is now classified as an untouchable geological anomaly, listed under Permanent Hazard Zone, non-recoverable. We have withdrawn all deep space assets that might observe the Velatus, deciding to simply let the cosmos keep its own terrible counsel, preferring the comfort of the fabricated reality. I am sitting here, feeling the cool air generated by the fan against my face, listening to the ambient sounds of the sleeping world, the gentle traffic outside, the distant, muffled sound of a train horn, the rhythmic tick of the heating element cooling down. It's a comforting rhythm, a simple, three-dimensional rhythm, stable and predictable. But when I close my eyes, I don't see darkness. I see the vast, impossible lattice, 7 million light-years wide, and I feel the subtle, slow pulse of the immense, shifting geometry wrapped around our home world, held back only by the engineered pulse. The filter is working, but it's no longer perfect. Sometimes, in the deepest stillness of the night, when the light is just right and my guard is down, I catch a flicker,